Well, thank you everybody who's joined us. I appreciate everybody's time and their focus on the presentation we have today. Hopefully we continue to track further interest. This is Judd Watts. I am with Teradata, been with Teradata going on 6 years at this point in time. It's been my pleasure to work with WhereScape as an alliance partner of Teradata's, fully integrated with everything that Teradata does. They simply provide some really exciting automation capabilities that is able to do the build out of data warehouse and big data environments extremely quickly with a variety of, say, functionality capabilities that are built into that software that help organizations like Fidelity Bank, both large and small, and Fidelity Bank has particularly been welcomed the opportunity to grow substantially, and with that growth comes a wealth of data. And Eric Martz has been with us now for some period of time. He's worked with the WhereScape tools and the Teradata data warehouse environment, and he's been able to do some remarkable things with the help of Teradata. And Eric, if we roll to the next slide to kind of further on some of the introductions, Eric's been the project manager there at Fidelity Bank. Jack Howard, who's the global principal architect for WhereScape, has been many, many years a Teradata customer and a Teradata employee for a period of time, a solutions architect, and a number of years here with WhereScape as well, too. He's worked hand in hand with Eric quite a bit. So all of us together will be answering some questions and answers here at the end. I'll point out to those that are online that would like further handouts of information we walk through today. There is an access point on the left-hand side with regards to handouts. Feel free to download those. And otherwise, if you also have questions along the way that come to mind, feel free to use the chat function within this environment, and we'd be delighted to field those at the end. But with that, I'm delighted to introduce Eric Martz, Fidelity Bank.
Thank you very much, Judd. First of all, I'd like to say good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are, and thanks for attending today's webinar. I hope that by sharing some of the problems we have faced and how we solve them can give you ideas on how to solve some of the problems you may be facing today. As Judd mentioned, my name is Eric Martz, and I am a project manager here at Fidelity Bank. While my title is project manager, I've been responsible for developing and managing the data warehouse. So it'd probably be more accurate to call me a data architect or an ETL developer, or maybe some amalgamation of both. To give you a quick history of the project, we kicked it off in mid-February of 2016. So we have been customers of WhereScape and Teradata for a bit over a year and a half. To begin with, we had a couple consultants on site for a few weeks, but the Fidelity team began with our business intelligence reporting manager and myself. After a few months, we added a business analyst to the reporting team, and then in the last month, we've added another business analyst and an ETL developer. So at the moment, we have a team of 5 working on the data warehouse and reporting. Quick history of Fidelity Bank. We started as a one-branch community bank in Decatur in 1974, and we're currently headquartered in Buckhead, Georgia. Just to give you an idea, those are both smushed right up next to Atlanta. We've grown into a full-service bank with a presence in 11 southeastern states and approximately 1,300 employees. Currently, we have $4.5 billion in assets owned and 9.9 billion in assets serviced for others. And what that means is while the customer sends their loan payment to us, they may call us if they're having issues with their loan. We service it, but it's actually owned by someone else. Now, despite our current size, our mission remains to be the #1 community bank with the best customer service in town. So while we've become a larger bank, our culture is to keep the feel of a hometown bank that is involved in our community, which we do by participating in various community fundraisers, working with Habitat for Humanity, and volunteering at local festivals. Let's see. So as we've grown, there's been many changes in how the bank work and how team members work together. In a smaller community bank, communication and collaboration are easier since team members wear many hats and everyone is under the same roof. There's some risk there because if someone leaves with a lot of knowledge, that's knowledge walking out of the bank, but at the same time, it's just easier to have an understanding of the data set and the customers and what's going on in the bank. Also, but as we've grown, departments become more siloed and team members become more specialized, focusing on their area alone. Departments also split functions. So instead of just having lending, you have commercial lending and mortgage lending, indirect lending, so on and so forth. So reporting across departments becomes harder because while in my example here we're dealing with commercial loans and mortgage loans, each department focuses on different aspects of the loans. Of course, now we have tens of thousands of customers, hundreds of thousands of accounts spread across multiple sources. As our data sets have grown, they have become very difficult to manage. So with the growth we've experienced, that's provided a lot of opportunity. For instance, we can provide more products than ever before. But we also have new issues to deal with. One of those issues you see here is limited data insight. Without a dedicated reporting structure and multiple sources for loan data, each department ends up doing its own thing. Commercial lending has its own system and its own reports, and mortgage lending has its own system and its own reports. And I don't mean to pick on commercial lending and mortgage lending. It's just when I say those, I assume most people know what they mean, knows what those products are. So obtaining a full understanding of each data set is a serious challenge. And that brings me to manual report generation. Using multiple source systems, and we have multiple sources for more than just loans, but mostly I'm going to talk about loans because that's where banks make a bit of money. But using multiple source systems means looking at our entire loan portfolio is a challenge. Reports are generated from each source system, and then they have to be manually stitched together using Excel and VLOOKUP typically. Not only is this time consuming, but it introduces the opportunity for errors. This is also the same challenge that we experience in reporting trends or reporting month-over-month or year-over-year data. All the trend reports need to be manually generated. And as you can imagine, with the issues that I've covered, responding quickly to reporting requests is a serious challenge. So we've typically handled reporting in three ways. First of all, you have standard reports provided by the source systems. You have third-party reporting systems, which are fed by data extracts, and while their third-party reporting systems are good, they're typically focused. So you can customize them a little bit here and there, but they're not general enough to report across multiple source systems. Custom tactical reports were also created by our in-house programmers. These report requests were prioritized with programming needs, with other programming needs, and could be delayed days or even weeks. So as you can imagine, if our in-house programmers are updating one of our core systems, it could take 3 or 4 weeks to get a report that you requested. So how do we make the greatest impact with limited resources and experience? The obvious answer to these issues is to build a data warehouse. This provides, first of all, the dedicated reporting system that merges the source systems, and it holds historical data and provides that one version of the truth that data warehouses claim to provide. And part of the solution are the dedicated personnel that focuses on responding to reporting needs. So with a project of this size, an RFP was issued. We had about 20 vendors respond to it, including people from IBM, Fiserv, SAP, Teradata, and WhereScape. But in the end, we decided that we could make the greatest impact using Teradata and WhereScape. So to begin the process, we looked for our primary pain point. In other words, we wanted to find where we could make the greatest impact quickly. We decided risk management had the greatest need for report automation, and part of risk management's responsibility is assessing risk we take with the loans that we book. So obtaining a full picture of the loan portfolio and associated risk was a manual process that took about 3 weeks. So imagine that we get to the end of September and you can't get data for that end of month period until mid-November, mid to late November. That can be frustrating if you're needing to make decisions. As I mentioned, we focused on a single pain point, and what we did was we broke the problem down into its component parts so that we could solve each problem and build towards an overall solution. I'm sure we've all heard of those times where a company's built a data warehouse and they take 2 to 5 years to build this whole working solution. We did not have that amount of time. We needed to get data into the hands of users quickly, so we decided to break each part down, solve each problem quickly, and present as we were solving problems. So we began importing loan data from our primary core system, which is called Signature from Fiserv, and built a model that would allow us to build reports from it. Then we began the process of importing data for our other loan sources and merged them into the model. While we began with loan data, we have since imported data for checking and savings accounts, CDs, GL, and transactional records. We're currently beginning the project to import CIF data, which is customer information data, and building the 360 view of the customer. So this diagram here is just a simplified understanding of our data warehouse. And one thing that's really neat, on the left side here, you see the landing portion of the diagram with our landing tables in it. We actually use WhereScape's concept of ELT instead of ETL. So instead of extract, transform, load, we extract, load, and transformed. This means instead of pulling and transforming data as we pull it from the source, we create copies of our source system tables in the data warehouse. We found this has several advantages. First of all, our system admins are more comfortable that we load data once a day, and then it's a simple select star from our source system, so it's not a lot of work on their side. We're not draining resources on them every time we pull data. Second of all, we can look at source data untouched and untransformed in the data warehouse, which is extremely useful when we're troubleshooting issues. And then while it's not a part of this diagram, we actually created persistent landing tables. So after each data import, we move the source data into a data store database. We append each row with the date work is processed. So this means we can look back at how an account looks at any point in time. We can reload data if necessary, and it also acts as a form of data lineage, which is very useful for us for compliance and auditing. From there we stage, and data actually flows along 2 paths, even though I'm only showing 1 path in this diagram. First, we have what is shown, and that's data from our separate source systems are transformed and merged. When building the loan model, each source is unique, and merging all loan data together is impractical. So we have about 60 of the most important fields across the sources that we merge and conform. Now, not pictured here, we also present each source individually so that reports can still be tailored for each department. From staging, we move data into what we call our production tables, which is the data warehouse portion of this diagram. This is where the data is conformed, transformed, and it's that single version of the truth that's used for reporting. And then the presentation portion of this diagram represents the views that our reporting department and actually other departments now use to access the data warehouse. Overall, we've built a star schema with some elements of third normal form, so it's a bit of a hybrid environment. Involved in the initial phase of this project, which was replacing manually generated reports for risk management, we built a few hundred landing tables, about 150 to 200 staging tables, around 100 dimension, fact, and detail tables, and the associated views. So the initial phase was completed, and we began producing reports for risk management in 4 months. And I'd like to step back and just take a moment to consider this. We started with a blank slate, a Teradata appliance with only system tables. We did not use a pre-built banking model where we just had to match up data. We did this work with primarily 1 developer, and we had a working data warehouse in 4 months. Now, today, a little over a year and a half later, we are regularly providing 85 reports to various departments in the bank. And I'm pretty sure we get reports to every department in the bank. We also provide custom tactical reports to managers at their request. We were able to build quickly because WhereScape automates much of the build process. So why did we choose to automate this process? First of all, building a data warehouse is an expensive project. We wanted quick wins, to gain traction and start showing a return on investment quickly. Our business users needed better access to data quickly. We didn't have 2 to 5 years to build a data warehouse that may or may not be useful. Our users, especially risk management, needed access to data quickly. Now, WhereScape and Teradata together allowed us to build and present our data to our business analysts quickly. They were able to validate data, and then we could iterate where needed. So, resource constraints. Every business deals with resource constraints. Resources, I think, can be labeled typically in time, money, and personnel. I've already mentioned that we didn't have 2 to 5 years to build something and then present it to business users. Our users needed access to data quickly, and in 2 to 5 years, what we built may not meet the needs of the users anymore. Things just change way too fast. In terms of money, we needed to keep costs low, and I'll expand on it in a moment, but using WhereScape and Teradata kept our tool sets simple, and it kept the cost down. Finally, using WhereScape, we did not need a full team of developers. Until about a month ago, we've built everything with just one developer. So I mentioned a simple tool set, and since we only have one developer, it's not really a wise use of my time managing half a dozen or a dozen tools. WhereScape provides pretty much a single pane of glass to build and manage the data warehouse. And finally, we had limited experience in developing the data warehouse. This is the first time Fidelity started a data warehouse. I'm sure there's companies out there that have 2 or 3, but this is our first time. This is also my first time building a data warehouse. So something I have appreciated using WhereScape is that since I can build quickly, I can also fail quickly. If a model is not going to work, we're able to find that out, make the appropriate changes, or if needed, just start over altogether. So this leads me to a discussion of consistency and speed of delivery. As I mentioned, the issue of limited experience, in the data warehouse development. When I started, I was familiar with SQL, but I never created a table in Teradata. I had not written, and I did not know how to write, a TPT script. I've since learned using on my own setup at home, but that was just so I could understand the underlying structure I was using. WhereScape writes most of the code that runs our data warehouse. So in a year and a half, we've built over 4,000 landing tables, and I haven't written a single DDL statement for any of them. To create tables in WhereScape Red, it's a simple drag and drop. Might have to make some minor changes due to keyword constraints, but after that, I can just right-click, hit Create Table, and the DDL is created and executed on our Teradata database. For loading data from our sources, well, let me go back a little bit. We load using Teradata's TPD, which is Teradata Parallel Transporter, and I've not written a single script for any of our data loads. For loading data from our sources, WhereScape creates the TPT script on the fly. So since I have access to multiple loading processes, I can actually change that in WhereScape and reload the table using a different loading system. And WhereScape will just create the appropriate script on the fly and load the table. And that's actually something that I found very useful when it comes to troubleshooting issues. When it comes to writing stored procedures, WhereScape actually provides the same experience using the metadata to build procedures, and that includes any transformations that need to occur. That's all in the metadata. Overall, this means the code that runs the data warehouse is not only built quickly, but it's consistent. I found it useful when I need to handwrite procedures to be able to look at code built using best practices. So as an example, in speed of delivery, we actually had a table that I consider it a very noisy table. And that's because it had several hundred attributes in it, and the attributes would have month 1 appended to the end of them, month 2, month 3, so you might have items returned month 1, items returned month 2. And the strange thing was, in some places, month 1 was the newest data, month 12 was the oldest data. In some cases, month 1 was January, and month 12 was December, which is kind of strange, and it's hard to analyze a table with everything updating in different ways. So talking with our business analyst, he wanted to actually break the table into 2 different tables and pivot them so that the month and year was part of the row instead of part of an attribute. In about a day and a half, I was able to build 2 tables, wrote the stored procedures, and in this case I had to handwrite it because we were using dynamic SQL. And then I was able to load 12 months of data because we already had it in the table into it and present it to our business analyst. By organizing it and getting out a lot of the noise, our business analyst was able to watch the table update for several days and find some new nuances in how this table updated. He got that information back to me. I truncated the tables, made changes in the stored procedures where I needed to make them, represented it. He was able to watch the tables update for a few more days and find that everything was working normally. What this did for the business users, though, we were able to use this table to automate some risk management for our branch administration department, and they have told us that that's saving them about $70,000 a year in labor costs. And as you can imagine, 2 days of work for $70,000 a year, that's a good return on investment. People are very happy with that. So, as I mentioned, we wanted a simple tool set. The diagram you see here, it's actually taken directly from WhereScape Red. You see the data sources on the left and business intelligence and reporting tools on the right. And then everything you see in the middle that's bordered in red is managed by WhereScape Red. I'm able to manage interactions with our source systems, interactions with the data warehouse itself, interactions with our reporting structure, and our scheduling systems all in one spot. So WhereScape Red is truly an IDE, or integrated development environment, for the data warehouse. And one thing that I don't see on this diagram, although it might be considered to be part of the metadata, is documentation. With WhereScape Red, I can actually create browser-based documentation. So anyone that has access to that documentation can look into our data warehouse, see how data flows through, see how transformations back. They can do impact diagrams to see where data is coming from. And it's all, again, at the click of a button. The work is done for me, which makes things so much easier. So I'd like to expand a little bit on reporting trends and how difficult it was to report trends or provide reports comparing data month over month or year over year. Core systems are only concerned with the state of an account at the present moment. They hold no history. So building reports that provided trending data used to only be possible manually. Business users would have to look at previous reports and put data together, or in a worst case scenario, they would have to have data loaded from backup tape and then the data analyzed. And as you can imagine, responding to change, responding to requests is very difficult when you're having to do things manually or load data from backups. To resolve this issue, we loaded 10 years worth of data from our primary core system into the data warehouse. So what we decided to do when we built this is, rather than trying to bring historical data into our current structure, we actually duplicated it and created a historical structure, which gave us the opportunity to import stage and work with the data and understand it without affecting our current systems. And the great thing about Teradata is the space that we had available to us. We had a set of tables. We knew what tables we needed to perform the historical load, so we made a request to our core system programmers to have those tables loaded from backup tape. We also thought about tables that we would need in the future for good measure. So a programmer from our core system loaded each set of tables into end-of-month libraries on his system, and then we were able to take all those tables and load 10 years worth of data into our data warehouse in about 3 days. So that's it was over 3,000 tables, and now we have the data always available to us, and we can utilize it when we need it, and kind of at our leisure. It's just great that in one fell swoop we were able to get a bunch of data from our core system, and we don't have to keep going back for more data, keep loading more data from backup tapes. Now, at this point, we actually did hire a consultant ETL developer from WhereScape. There's a great guy named Indrajit. In 5 weeks, he was able to analyze data and changes to the table structure over time. Now, this is the part where automation came in so useful. He was able to easily duplicate the existing structure into the historical structure, like I talked about, then test and build and import the actual production data to analyze and make the appropriate changes. As you can imagine, data became dirtier as we went further back in history, so we had to analyze that, handle that, And then also there were significant changes in table structure that Indrajit needed to handle. But in 5 weeks' time, he was able to analyze, import, validate, and present the historical data for us. Now, business users get report trends, month-over-month data, year-over-year data very easily. As you can imagine, they're very excited about that. So in our old environment, responding to change was very difficult. I mentioned tactical reports being delayed days or even weeks, and manual report generation was a lengthy process, and loading data from tape for analysis is also complex and lengthy. So to discuss how WhereScape and Teradata helped us solve this problem, I'd like to go over a very specific example. During development, we created a model to import, process, and present transactional records for our accounts. This was done after the historical import project, so we did not present historical transactions, and we just decided we could wait. And that goes back to resource constraints, time and personnel. If you have one developer, what do you want them focused on? We just didn't want the focus on importing those historical transactions at that moment. At some point, several weeks or maybe a couple months later, business users decided they needed to analyze transactions for checking and savings accounts. So loading historical data was given a high priority. And when I say high priority, I mean it was, hey, Eric, we need you to stop doing what you're doing and go ahead and import these. They asked me about how long it would take, and just to kind of pad it and make sure I had plenty of time, I told them about a day and a half. This was about lunchtime that I was being asked this. And fortunately, as I mentioned earlier, we had already asked for this data from our core system. So we had the source data sitting in the warehouse ready. It just hadn't been presented yet. I took the same approach to build a historical model that would prevent older data from corrupting data in our current model. Once I built the model, I scheduled and loaded the transactions. That was about 1.5 billion rows of data that was processed. And the entire process took 6 hours. I don't mean it took 6 hours to process 1.5 billion rows. I mean from the time I sat down, began building the model, to when I called the business intelligence and reporting manager to tell her it was done, that was a total of 6 hours. And the same with any other development project. We built, tested, made changes, tested again until data was processed correctly. And even with a couple iterations, we were able to do the work in less than a day. So imagine going from a time where knowing that you're going to have to analyze a bunch of historical data, it's going to take a month or so, to, hey, we need this historical data, how fast can we get it? In total, in 24 hours, people had reports on their desks that let them see the analysis of the data. That's a huge turnaround, and that's a huge benefit for business users. As you can imagine, we've gained a lot of traction with this data warehouse. People are very excited about it, and they're looking at all the wonderful things. Instead of going, well, can I get to this data? They're now saying, how fast can I get to this data? It's really amazing the changes that have happened in Fidelity due to this. So data insight is also an issue, especially if you have multiple sources for a product type. All businesses have bad data, and source systems sometimes don't have the constraints you would like. Now, I want to point out that this is not about pointing fingers or placing blame. It's about finding issues and resolving them for efficient processing. And the great thing is, it's not just efficient processing in the data warehouse. If we can find issues in data and help our source systems, our source system developers, and our source system admins make changes that help them, processing becomes more efficient everywhere. So first of all, I want to take a moment and recognize the importance of having a dedicated reporting structure and the dedicated personnel that understands and utilizes it. These teammates in our reporting department, they familiarize themselves with data sets from not one, but multiple sources. I want to point out that without them, what we've built doesn't matter at all. They actually take the model and make it useful for the business user. So I just want to point that out. I find it a little difficult to explain, but just having the data in a single dedicated reporting structure with the appropriate personnel makes finding bad data much easier. And also, since it's our job to conform and transform the data, it's important that we find all the different use cases, including use cases of bad data, and handle them. So just as an example real quick, with indirect loans, which are car loans, as we were analyzing the data, I found that there were several instances of a car loan having multiple pieces of collateral, which certainly didn't make sense to me. Went back to our source system administrator, asked him about it, and of course he said, no, that doesn't make sense. Car loans shouldn't have multiple pieces of collateral. He looked into his test system, found out that probably when they were installing it, somebody missed a checkbox or a radio button, and it allowed multiple pieces of collateral to be added. And what would happen probably is people at the car dealerships, they would start adding things and accidentally add a second piece of collateral, realize they made a mistake, exit out of it, but never delete the first one. He was able to then lock that down so that people couldn't do that. It just makes more efficient processing across the board. Another thing is building dimensional data has been building a dimensional data model has been very important. Since dimensions help slice and dice, finding unexpected values when slicing and dicing is just really easy. And going back to the automation, since I spend less time writing code, I have more time for other activities, just taking the time to look into the data, try to figure it out from different perspectives, and find what's going wrong with it. And then also, there's an issue with limited understanding across data sets. And again, having the dedicated personnel, dedicated reporting structure helps. And actually, I'm kind of running low on time, so I'm going to not spend too much time on that. So to wrap up, I'd like to talk a little bit about Agile development. As a caveat, and I know we understand this, but I just want to make a point, that Agile is not the end-all, be-all of development. Just like we build database models, Agile is a model for how software can be developed. And despite attempting to move faster, we still need to perform the analysis, the testing, and the validation of the software and data that we write. WhereScape, it has allowed me to build models and expose data quickly, which means actual production data can be put into the hands of business analysts for analysis and testing. And I'd like to point out, we hear or read articles about Agile not working, about people having trouble with Agile. And I think one of the problems we face is that we try to use Agile development, but we use old tools. So we're trying to build Agile using Agile development or an Agile model, and we're still handwriting code. And if it takes you a week to write all the code you need to write, it's just going to take you a week, and it's hard to be Agile using the tools we've always used. But WhereScape's changed that for us. This means we can find issues, we can change quickly, and meet our business user needs. So when I tell our story, building a data warehouse in 4 months, I receive positive reactions. People say it's great, it's impressive, or they'll just say, wow, that's neat. To me, though, what's great isn't that we did it in a short period, but that we have built something useful for Fidelity. We have been able to quickly begin the process of changing how information is consumed at Fidelity. At the end of the day, I found that the automation and speed helps, but it helps me better meet the needs of our business users, and that is what I find most important. So thank you very much for your time, and at this point, I would like to turn this over to Jack Howard for questions.
Well, thank you very much, Eric. That was a great story that you've been able to share with us about building your data warehouse. We can, in the webinar, we're able to take questions from the group, the viewers that are watching. If you have any questions, go ahead and put those forward, and we'll answer them for you. In the interim, until we have a few questions, Eric, where is your Teradata instance located? Are you on-prem or in the cloud?
We actually have an on-premise appliance. It's a 2-node 2800, so it's rather small, but we're a bank. Banks don't have a ton of data. It's mostly just numbers and alphanumeric characters. It's more than enough for us, and we've been very happy with it.
Great, great. We have some customers that have only ever been in the cloud, and then we have the traditional on-premise model as well. Any questions? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think a neat thing about being in the cloud, one thing that I have to manage is the disaster recovery aspects of having a Teradata appliance on site. Being in the cloud just takes that away. That's really nice. And then, of course, there's the ability to scale up or scale down as necessary.
Right. Eric, so we have a question from the field. and were your users, the question is around how did user requirements change? Were they just static, or were you constantly dealing with change in what people were asking for?
There was a constant level of change. Fortunately, our business intelligence and reporting manager, a lady named Julie, she had a lot of business knowledge, especially around Signature, which is our primary core system. When we got into our mortgage and SBA source systems, there was a lot of analysis, a lot of having to change our understanding. And then I view my users primarily as our reporting department, and they had needs that changed all the time. For instance, when we started building our data warehouse, we began building it, as I mentioned, based off of Signature. And then when we started importing other source systems, we found that we needed to kind of change our structure of the data warehouse to allow all the sources to merge together. And I think in any other project where you're not using WhereScape or something, you would need to have meetings, involve managers, make models, figure everything out. But for us, it was really just, I talked with Julie, I talked with the consultant that was on site. We made sure our understanding was all on the same page, and in about 2 days, I changed the entire structure of the data warehouse so that data flowed down those two paths that I described earlier. And, I think to answer the question of how quickly can we respond, well, we responded in 2 days to completely changing everything.
That's very impressive. We have a question also, Eric. What is the difference between landing tables and staging tables?
So the landing table is an exact copy of our source system. We literally, in WhereScape Red, we go into our source systems, we have a source browser, we take that, copy it over, we load it, and then we have a copy of our source data in our data warehouse, which is it's fantastic for troubleshooting. As I mentioned, we create persistent landing tables so that we can look back at any point in time, see what an account looked like. We're also putting very little strain on our source systems, which our source system administrators are very happy about. The staging tables are where we actually start transforming and conforming the data. It's where all our transformations take place. Some tables have a very short staging process. They basically go from landing to staging into what we call our production tables. Some tables actually go through 3 or 4 steps of staging. We might do staging and transformations in one spot. We add dimensional keys in the next step in staging. And the neat thing is, going from one step of staging, creating these staging tables, creating this process, it's mostly just drag and drop, which I don't want to say it's just drag and drop. You still need the knowledge to build the model. You still need to have that attitude of, hey, I'm solving a problem. Let's see what the best way to solve this problem is. But it takes out all the tedious work of making sure your stored procedures are optimized, making sure they meet best practices. That's all done for you, which is fantastic.
Great answer. So I have a question asking where do you have any scenarios where WhereScape wasn't able to complete your request, as in was the file too large, too many attributes, or just an inability to do that? And you mentioned, was 1.5 billion rows your largest file?
We typically process, we typically process about 20 million rows of data a night. So in a very short period of time, yes, 1.5 billion rows was the largest we processed. And that was primarily, we had the end of month data, as I mentioned, already in the data warehouse. So we had the transactional records for the end of month of March 2015, April 2015. We had to merge those all together and then push them through staging and through to production. So in a short period of time, yes, 1.5 billion was the most. But we're dealing with Teradata, and Teradata can handle billions and billions of rows a day. We're not a particularly large bank, although we're large for a community bank for sure. But in the grand scheme of things, we're probably a small regional bank.
Yeah, I would just
To answer
add to that, to your point, since we are running, WhereScape runs solely on Teradata. After the data is in Teradata, we have customers processing, we have a customer processing 400 billion rows of data a day on a 3,400 node system. So scale isn't an issue with Teradata, and because we run on Teradata, WhereScape doesn't run into those scale issues.
And then to answer the other part of that question, have we run into a place where WhereScape just couldn't handle something? I would have to answer that with a yes and a no. We combined rather than combining all the historical records into our current, what we ended up doing at the end of the process is we have our historical table and we have our current table, and we make a view that combines those two tables together. That means our reporting people can report off of just the current if they want, or they can do historical and current. As we were creating that view, we had to custom write the DDL, and in the custom DDL section of creating a view, I think the character limit is 22,000 characters, but we had tables that had 500 to 800 attributes in them, so we quickly went over that. The neat thing that I was able to do though in WhereScape is I was able to create the view in not create the view, but kind of get everything like I was going to create it, put the appropriate sources for the view, and then in the notes section, I was able to say, here's what this is for, here's how we could handle it, and I included links to several articles that I read, and then this is how we did handle it, which was we custom wrote the DDL. We just ran it in Teradata SQL Assistant to create the views. But then I was able to say, here's where you can find the table create statements and all the documentation. So if you look in our documentation, you see everything about those views as though they were created in WhereScape. But then you also get the information to where you can find it and manually handle it.
Great, great. Any other questions? Probably the last question is just for the different people that you've introduced to WhereScape, how long do you really think it takes to get through the learning curve?
I'd have to start off by saying everybody is different. You certainly want someone that's going to attack problems, that's going to try to learn. But for me, and as I said, I didn't have any experience building data warehouses. When I started on this project, I literally had to ask what ETL stood for. I'd never heard of dimensional modeling, star schemas, snowflakes, any of that. But with just a few days, we had Indrajit on for 3 weeks to kick the project off, and I came in on the 3rd week. I had a few days with Indrajit. He taught me how to use WhereScape. I started learning about dimensional models, and once he was gone, I was the person building the data warehouse. I was able to build it really quick, and the learning process, while the learning curve was steep, I was able to overcome that very easily because I didn't have to worry about figuring out how Teradata wanted you to write DDL or how to write TPT scripts. That was handled for me so I could focus on the modeling and building a good model.
Great. If there are any more questions, we're happy to take them. Otherwise, I'll turn this back over to Judd to wrap up.
I do see one, if you don't mind. They ask if there's any other
Sure.
tools than WhereScape,
than
WhereScape within Fidelity. No, we don't use any other ETL tools. We do have Salesforce, and the data warehouse has become a data feed for Salesforce. But we don't have any other ETL tools. And again, the biggest advantage of that is that we have just a simple tool set. It's very easy to get work done. It's very easy to manage the whole process. When I do an update, it's a quick update, so on and so forth. I haven't really found any disadvantages to only using WhereScape at this point, so no huge pain points there.
Thank you, Eric.
Well, great.
Really appreciate that. That was a terrific overview. Sounds like a great experience. Just as a quick wrap-up, I know that you had put out an RFP, evaluated some 20 different offers and so forth. What was that selection process like? How did you arrive at this conclusion of Teradata and WhereScape?
Unfortunately, I was not, as I mentioned, I came in the third week of this project actually being kicked off. So my understanding of the RFP and that whole decision process is it's anecdotal, what I've heard from Julie and a couple other
Okay.
people within the bank. The one thing I would like to say, though, is for us, this is one of the biggest expenditures at the time, buying a Teradata appliance, getting all the licensing, having professionals come in for a few weeks to help kick off the project. But despite the large expenditure, in the scheme of data warehousing, the cost was very low. But it also allowed us the ability to customize what we wanted. If we had gone with someone like Fiserv, we would have had to go with their model, and any changes we wanted to make, we would have to pay to make those changes. This allowed us to do what we wanted to do, meet our business users' needs, and meet them very quickly.
Excellent. That is terrific insight. We really appreciate it. I know somewhere there along the line there was a proof of value or a proof of concept step. And to other folks that are considering WhereScape and Teradata, this is a pretty typical step in all of our processes, and one I think we'd all look forward to have that chance to work with one's own data, work with one's own use cases, and be able to stand them up in front of in front of your business users' eyes, and be able to respond to some of their business requirement changes, and just show how this agile process works. Be that responsive. But with that, would there be any other further wrap-up comments or questions? I bring everybody's attention to the handouts again. It looks like we've made available handouts of these slides, handouts of a couple of joint data sheets, how WhereScape and Teradata work together. But that's it. I'm pleased that everybody afforded us their time, and delighted to answer any questions you have along the way. My name's Judd Watts within Teradata, and look forward to working with all of you. Also look forward to having WhereScape's presence at the Teradata Partners here, kicking off October 22nd in Anaheim. So we look forward to seeing folks there as well. Thank you again, and Eric, thank you, and Jack as well. Take care.